All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Rutgers Rant. Politi here, Lanny Fonseca. As promised, a second episode this week, a little more serious than the first episode, tackling the issues around the athletic director vacancy, the abrupt resignation of Patrick Hobbs, people who may or may not replace him, candidates for the job, his legacy, and if you hadn't guessed already, the reason why we waited to record this episode until now, Brian's bombshell is the right word, but certainly big story on what was going on inside the gymnastics program that led up to in the months before Patrick Hobbs resigned, and we need to talk about that certainly. And I want to start there, and I think that for a lot of instances like this, people are not interested, Brian, on how the sausage is made. But I think it's important to kind of take us through this story in case people thought that we stumbled upon this the day that Patrick Hobbs resigned. That is far from the case.
No, it's not. I had been looking into this since early May. A few gymnasts had publicly on social media expressed some grievances about the way they were treated by the gymnastics program, namely their head coach, Umi Beasley. And we had looked into it, talked to a lot of people, and we were investigating this for a couple months. And then, of course, Pat Hobbs resigns a week and a half ago, and we continue to report the story until what we have today. But this was not as impressive as it would be for me to do this story in 10 days' time. That's not what happened. It had been a few months in the making, and this is kind of the end product of what we got in our investigation.
Right. And just to be clear, the story does not we're not saying that this is why Patrick Hobbs resigned. We want to be clear about that. That's not in the story. If you haven't read the story, you should read the story, make your own conclusions. But this was what was going on in the background over the last 4 or 5 months. This is a program that, and the words you used, and I think would be how anyone in athletics would call it an unusual interest in the gymnastics program. Around that team a lot. Tell us what the gymnasts told you. You talked to, was it 8 gymnasts, former and current gymnasts?
Correct.
Yeah. Tell us what they told you.
As far as Hobbs' involvement in the program, as far as
the whole thing. What were the allegations? Yeah.
Sure. The allegations were varied. There were some allegations about lack of concern about mental health, athletes going to the head coach, sharing issues with their mental health, and at best being ignored, and at worst it being held against them. One girl at one point late in the season when she retired was told that the coaching staff had it up to here with her mental health, and they had made too many accommodations already, which is obviously not something you want to hear when you are coming to someone for help, someone you trust with mental health concerns. There was accusations of flippant reasons for players being kicked off the team. One girl posted something on her private Snapchat story. It somehow got to the coach, and within an hour, and she was promptly told she no longer had a spot on the team because of that. And what this kind of boils down to is that these girls went to the school through the ethics and compliance department to express these concerns. Some of them went to Pat Hobbs, who is the leader of the athletic department, to express these concerns, and they felt that no one was listening to them. In the case of Pat Hobbs, he was siding with his coach, with the head coach, Umi Beasley, at every turn, and these athletes felt they had nowhere to go, which is why some of them went public on social media, and why some of them talked to us for this story.
I think you just touched on it right there, talking about what you put in the story as well, about the protection that these gymnasts felt that Pat Hobbs was giving Umi Beasley, the coach of the gymnastics team. Obviously, this was not a program that was having vast success at Rutgers, and a 3-42 record in the Big Ten is certainly not a good mark, as you pointed out in the story. But can you just describe how Umi's relationship was going, or how the program was doing or how the program is still currently doing right now?
So when we did our story about the overlook of the 10 years of Rutgers in the Big Ten, gymnastics was, along with volleyball, one of the worst programs in the department. Under Umi Salim's direction, there was some team records set, but against Big Ten competition, they are, if not the worst, one of the worst programs in the league. And they also spend more money than most teams in the league. These girls did feel and she was protected because they were going to Pat Hobbs to express these things, and they did not feel like they were being heard. That's where that aspect comes in. And as far as Pat Hobbs' involvement, he was around the team often this season, from my understanding, regularly at practices, attended a majority, if not all, home meets, went to multiple road meets with the gymnastics program, went to a meet in Nashville in which he participated in a yoga session with the team that was posted by the team's Facebook account. And these things just kind of felt off, which is, I think, where the unusual presence line comes from. Just he was the athletic director of a department with 22 team sports, and he was spending a lot of time around the gymnastics program.
Yeah, and I think that's unusual, to put it mildly. And it's not to say that as an athletic director you shouldn't be around all of your teams, but to travel with an Olympic sport, with a bad Olympic sport, to put it on time. I mean, not to be mean, but to show that much interest is certainly unusual. Given that, I mean, Pat Hobbs is not a presence at football practice. I mean, we're just being honest. Like, you guys are there all the time. He's never there. So just put that in the context. It's weird, right? And I think when I wrote the column, when he resigned, some people took offense to using that word. Like, these are unusual circumstances. And there's one thing in your story, and we finally got a response from Pat Hobbs. We got a response from a public relations crisis communications firm. Again, this is just like, and I understand, I'm not dismissing if the man has health problems, that's certainly something he needs to take care of. But these are not just behaviors that you see from someone, resigning abruptly, someone stepping aside from a job before a season like this, leaving his staff no time to prepare for it, having no continual relationship with the staff, no transition, again, like we talked to Pat Hobbs quite a bit during his time at Rutgers. We can text him and call him to ignore our calls about stuff in the immediate aftermath. There's just a lot of smoke here. We cannot connect the dots that this is the reason why Patrick Hobbs resigned. But I'm just telling you, it is certainly interesting is the word I'll use.
To reiterate, Pat Hobbs, in his statement through crisis PR firm that he used to communicate with us, did reiterate that he stepped aside because of health reasons. The university, when issuing a statement to us, reiterated that Pat Hobbs resigned for health reasons. They're all sticking with that. So that's their point of view on that. Just wanted to kind of make that clear that that is the narrative officially of why Pat Hobbs stepped down.
Right. And like you said, Steve, those are very serious things that on the surface you do have to take care of, and it's understandable. But you're right. Where there's smoke, sometimes there's fire, and something to keep in the back of your mind.
Brian,
to reiterate a point that I think you made, Steve, kind of in your column, we've seen very few people talk about Pat Hobbs around the athletic department. Steve Peichel did an interview with Jerry Carino. Greg Schiano mentioned it in his opening statement when talking to us on Saturday, the day after he resigned, but no quotes in the press release from the school announcing his departure. No, you'd think that an athletic director who, we'll talk about his legacy later, but did some good things in his job, and for a lot of fans is one of the best athletic directors in recent Rutgers history. You'd think that he'd get something from the university acknowledging his achievements, and there's just been nothing in the 10 days since he decided to resign.
And just to be clear, what Pat Hobbs did say in that statement was that all of these allegations were looked into and dismissed. Is that the long story short part?
Correct. Yes. Both the school and Pat Hobbs say that these claims were investigated and found to be unsubstantiated.
Right.
I should add. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, no, finish your thought before we move on.
No, go ahead. Okay.
The other part of this is the fourth thing like this that's happened under Pat Hobbs. And I think that's an interesting thing to bring to light. The softball program, swimming and diving had a situation like this. There was a member of a senior staff, Mike Zuhl, who there was an investigation into his behavior. Mike Zuhl turns out to be, and just the twist that you have a hard time believing, the go-between between the athletic department and the gymnastics program. Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff here that's funky.
One thing I wanted to mention that I didn't mention in the beginning when we were talking about allegations, one thing that really struck me was, so these two girls that are kicked off the team, they start expressing, after not being heard by the school or by Pat Hobbs, and after being kicked off the team, they go to social media, and within a month, the head coach that kicked them off the team has gotten them kicked out of their jobs, manning the front desk of the practice facility, a paid job that they were counting on to make money to pay for books and things they need as a student. And then they were reported by the head coach to the student council, to the Office of Student Conduct, and essentially is an effort to kick them out of school, right? So they've already taken away their spot on the gymnastics team, taken away their job that is, yes, associated with the gymnastics team, but there are girls working that job, from my understanding, that are not part of the gymnastics team. And there was an attempt to take them out of the school they're going to. Those allegations from the head coach were found to be unsubstantiated, not enough evidence, and that claim was dropped. But I think that's another example of going way too far and going overboard on something way further than she probably had to.
Yeah, and this quote really struck a chord. We felt isolated. We felt so hopeless. We were screaming at the top of our lungs, "Help us! Help us! Help us!" And no one was answering. No matter what we did or said, nothing was being done. We were not being taken care of properly. We're telling the athletic director, we're telling ethics and compliance, and they ignored us. Yeah, and remember, the athletic director, you can't come back to this. Like, the athletic director is not a stranger. He's the man in the yoga class. Like, he's the man on going on trips with you to the cities and road trips with the team. I mean, it's just, again, there's a lot here to digest. I encourage everyone to read it. Pat, do you have any other final questions before we move
I guess just what I was bringing up earlier, the success of the gymnastics program. Brian did a great job in the story breaking down the financials and how Coach Umi Salim Beasley was ultimately rewarded with contract extensions despite ultimately subpar performances. I thought that was a really strong part of the article as well, and also the donations that you brought up in the article as well, Brian. So maybe you could just bring us home on that aspect of it all.
Sure. The donation numbers, the contribution numbers that the program has received in her tenure have dropped significantly. In her first year, fiscal year 2019, it was in the six figures, something in the realm of $200,000. Last year, they received $7,500 in contributions, which is just an enormous drop. I can't tell you why that is, but it is notable. She received 2 contract extensions. So she has signed 4 different amendments to her contract. Original contract, an amendment directly after that first contract. She signed a new deal in 2022, and directly after in 2023, she signed an extension that gave her a 5-figure raise and came with a $25,000 retention bonus each subsequent year. So after being hired in 2018, making $95,000 in base salary, by the end of the contract, or I should even say, this past season, she made more than double that by making $190,000 in base salary and the retention bonus she received. And this is, as you said, despite the fact the team success is not there, the team record is not there. There is an argument that gymnastics is a sport that you could look at score. Was the score elevating? But the truth is the score was not elevating enough for it to be competitive in the Big Ten. And that's why they were 2-43 in Big Ten play over the last 5 years. That does not meet the bar to success in any realm, I would say. Right.
Yeah. And I know that obviously Rutgers is well known for giving out contract extensions. And so maybe she's not the only one to receive one. That's one thing we should point out. I'm certain of that. But yeah, underperforming program with good facilities now. Good tradition in New Jersey. There's a lot there that stands out. She did not comment for the story, Brian. Is that correct?
She was not made available by the school.
Gotcha. Okay.
She is still the head coach of the gymnastics program. She's still a Rutgers employee. We went through the proper channels, and by the time we were ready to publish the story and the deadline we give them, they did not make her available.
Okay. All right. What do we think is going to happen there? Obviously, with softball, the coach survived, still coaching, doing a good job by all counts. Sometimes you can overcome things like this. Sometimes changes are put in place that make things better. It seems like a very difficult to imagine her continuing, but I've been wrong on many things before. What do you think?
We shall see. No really way to tell. So we'll see where this goes.
All right. Let's dive in a little bit. And the one thing we haven't done, and I think it's just kind of was such an abrupt thing that we weren't ready for it. And I was on vacation, and we didn't have a chance to just kind of discuss Pat Hobbs as AD and the legacy of him in that job. And it's certainly, you're going to look back on it as a pretty mixed thing. I think he did a pretty good job, and I've written that a bunch of times. I mean, there are things that he is responsible for: hiring Steve Peichel, number one, building a basketball facility. My goodness, the level, the issue that was before he got here for previous ADs, and the state of the facilities was terrible, and no one had built anything for years. That was a huge improvement, and you have to credit some of the team's success and the ability to recruit athletes like Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey to that. That's part of it. Those are two big wins. Looking at the flip side, I think that obviously the very difficult hiring of Greg Schiano and that entire process left a bitter taste in the mouth of many people. A lot of people who were very prominent Rutgers people, who then that could have been handled so much better than it was. And it was a difficult situation that led to a lot of, I think, some donor problems. I don't think donor outreach was his strength. And certainly, as we've written and documented, and Keith Sargent did an incredible story on it recently, the NIL thing was a fiasco. What am I missing?
Well, this is the fourth, I don't know if we want to call it a scandal, but fourth different issue coming up in his tenure in 8 years, right? You have the swimming and diving coach. That was a bit of a debacle. The softball investigation, as you mentioned before, Mike Zuhl, who in an interesting twist was the sports administrator for the gymnastics program this past year. He was accused of bullying and creating a hostile work environment, and he's still employed. And this is the fourth issue in his 8-year tenure. It feels like that's above average, more than the usual AD, and I don't think those could be overlooked. But otherwise, I think you did a pretty good overview of his tenure. I think the NIL thing is a really big thing. I just think they were not well adjusted to the new reality of college sports, and I think that you should be judged by that. I think other athletic departments were more aggressive, and I think Rutgers was a bit too conservative under his leadership. And I would say the Greg Schiano fiasco, really, to me, between that's the main negative of his tenure, and then the main positive is the Steve Peichel hiring. I'm not sure which outweighs the other, but the Greg Schiano fiasco really, like you said, left a lot of people with a bitter taste in their mouth, and I think really, really left a stain on his legacy, whatever that may be in 10 years.
Right.
The only thing I'll add is the way that college sports are now shifting, with revenue sharing coming and the professionalization of college athletics right in our face. Rutgers is always generally, whether it's NIL, facilities, hiring, reaction to bad press, investigations, things like that, playing from behind. And it just feels like with the huge change that's about to hit college sports, Rutgers is once again playing from behind with revenue sharing and things like that. And this couldn't have come at a worse time from a leadership perspective. So I think that's just, I don't know how that weighs on Pat. We're talking about legacy here, but it's almost like if you cared this much, I understand the circumstances, but this is a school that you have so much pride in and love for, and it's almost like leaving someone at the altar. It felt like a little bit.
Yeah, there's an element of that, certainly. Yeah. And I should say this as well as we discussed the legacy. Like, he inherited a bad situation. Like we can't dismiss that. It was a hot mess when Julie Herman left, and in a million different ways. I mean, you went from an AD who, talk about not being able to talk to the press. Like every time she opened her mouth, it was an absolute disaster. And the Kyle Flood situation, and the stuff that was happening in that program under her watch, and donor apathy. He came into a bad situation, and improved that. He was a front-facing guy. He was the guy cheerleading on the sideline of games. He loved that part of it, which is another reason why I'm just having a hard time buying the just going to cut the cord here before, the greatest chapter in Rutgers history, as he used to say, was about to be written. Finally, this is going to be the year that that chapter could be written. We're 2 weeks away from season opener, and he steps aside from that. Certainly, that's another reason why a lot of people left him scratching his head. But it's important to remember that he did inherit a bad situation. Someone asks, is Rutgers in a better place now than when he took over? Absolutely. But a lot of that is baked in, right? I mean, a lot of that's the Big Ten money's finally coming in. A lot of that is, they got on the right boat. A lot of that had to do with the AD, two ADs before him, Tim Pernetti, and getting Rutgers into a position where they're not in a conference that is going to put them in a good spot. So mixed is the best word I would use, I think. All right. Fair. Next AD, the big question. And I don't see any signs that Rutgers is in a hurry here. I don't know that Rutgers has to be in a hurry here. I think it's better that they're not in a hurry here to make the hire. We have not heard any word yet about a search firm. Ryan Passari, who was Hobbs' loyal lieutenant, chief of staff, is the interim AD. If people around Rutgers, I'm sure a lot of people know Ryan. He's a sharp dude. So they kind of got it covered in the interim. But yeah, I mean, now we're getting, I think the biggest takeaway is they must do this right. Got to do a national search at the very basic national search.
100% agree. 100% agree. I don't know if there is a slam dunk candidate out there. I know Sarah Baumgartner, it was the first name mentioned because she was number 2 under Pat Hobbs for the beginning of his tenure. I just don't see that happening. She's at maybe the best athletic department in the country. And I think you'd probably want someone else that either has athletic director experience or has significant experience in the Power 4 and is currently in one of those departments that knows what it takes to be successful in this new era. A lot of people brought up Brian White. He's at FAU. That's a really good name. That'd be a great hire. I don't know if this is a spot that he'd want to leave FAU for, or if he's maybe waiting for even greener pastures. But there are only so many AD jobs in the Big Ten and in the SEC, the two leagues that really matter. So you have to think Rutgers will at least be an attractive option for a lot of attractive names.
Right. Yeah. That's true. That's for sure. And I think what you said about experience and a proven track record is so great to say. It's harder to find, right? It's how many guys are willing to make a big jump from a good situation. It's about finding the person from, maybe not an out of left field hire, but that's how it has to be for sometimes. Right. So like Pat Hobbs didn't come from Michigan per se. Right. He came from a completely different background.
Yeah. And
as a law school dean.
And it's a road we can't go down again. That's a road like that. I think that's one thing for sure. Like the last few, and it's funny, just looking back on each of those scenarios, the last few ADs and how they were hired. Pat Hobbs, again, was just kind of foisted upon Rutgers in a bad situation. Julie Herman fired. He was supposed to be the interim AD. He said no. He wants to be and Chris Christie. I think that's all that. There was no search committee. There was no process. He was the AD, and okay. I guess when you think and considering the way Julie Herman was hired, which was like, someone told me this, and I was laughing, a 28-person search committee. I don't remember that. But I believe it because it was an absolute fiasco, and they ended up hiring someone with no experience in men's basketball or football. Just unthinkable. An athletic department like Rutgers, and someone who had walked into the door with her own major scandal that the opening press conference. I mean, just stuff that from the beginning, an absolute disaster. Didn't do their job vetting the candidate, hired for all the wrong reasons. So another strike, I just think you've got to do a national search. You've got to be able to find someone who's been in that chair, someone who knows how to do this, to run an athletic department. It should be an absolute prerequisite requirement for that job. And I will say, unlike 8 years ago, I think it's a really good job, and I think positioned well. You look around. I mean, I know there's always could be the sky is falling. People are like, well, what if they separate into 40 schools and Rutgers is kicked out? The next person should be the one who makes sure that doesn't happen, right? The next person should be the one to make sure Rutgers is positioned well, that the New York market, it's not just their address, that it's part of their identity. There's so much here. And I say that like, I believe it. Like, this is a good job. This is a good opportunity. There's all the problems of the past. Forget this program struggles. I think there's a lot here for someone who, is an up and coming AD. I think Brian White, you mentioned that name. I think it's a great name. And I kind of forgot. Like, you look at what he did for basketball. I forgot what he did for football, hiring Tom Herman down there. Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. The one name that comes up a lot, Tim Pernetti, I think, is a fantasy. I will say that. He just got a job. Maybe if it was 6 months ago, he just got a job leading a conference. I think that it would be a step down for him at this point, and it'd be too much money. So I'll get that one out of the way first.
Yeah.
Another interesting point, the intersection of how government and politics play into this situation as well. You mentioned before Chris Christie, the governor of New Jersey, and his close connection with Pat Hobbs. How does the long-term effect of the Board of Governors and many steps ahead of where we are here right now, talking about Pat Hobbs' legacy, how all that's going to factor into the situation is also really important.
Yeah, totally.
Let me throw in a hypothetical. People have brought this up. I figure we should talk about it. Greg Schiano, athletic director.
No, I don't think so. His job's not done as football coach. I mean, maybe maybe in 5 years from now, if he feels like he's gotten them to a point where they're not, they're doing something better than the Pinstripe Bowl and the program's in a great shape. And but I can't imagine that. And I don't know if you'd want that headache, to be honest with you. Like, I know the Barry Alvarez model's out there, but, I don't know. I've never talked to him about it, but I don't see that.
I agree.
Yeah.
I just we did talk about this last episode. Joe Harris-Simiak, coach in waiting. You mentioned the Barry Alvarez model. Didn't Barry Alvarez leave to become AD and then coach on an interim basis later on in his career? I don't think it's likely. I don't think it's going to happen, but I figured I'd bring it up because multiple people have brought it up to us, and I don't think it's impossible. I don't think it's likely. I don't think it's impossible.
Well, the important part is to realize how much influence will Greg have on this search? How much does Steve Peichel have on this search? Like, does that trickle down? I'm not really sure the inner workings of the athletic department at that level, but your two most influential coaches. I mean, we're talking about the intersection of government and athletics. New Jersey's highest paid employee. I don't know if still is, but right, like, obviously the head football coach is one of them. It's a high power position. This person will not be hired if Greg Schiano doesn't approve it. I totally believe that. And it's savvy, again, as my PhD in Schianology tells me, the fact that he, in his comments a couple of times, has mentioned the name Amy Towers, who, if you don't know who Amy Towers is, you're probably not around Rutgers. Well, she's now the chairwoman of the Board of Governors and an extremely influential person in the Rutgers universe, who will have a big say in this job. And I think there is certainly synergy there between the chairwoman of the Board of Governors and the head football coach. And I think as well, the university president. So while I'm trying to think of a polite way to put this, I mean, Schiano and Hobbs coexisted. I think it's probably the strongest verb I would put to use that phrase, and far longer than a lot of people thought they would have, right? Like when Schiano was introduced in that press conference, you put the over under on 2 years, I would have been hammering the under that relationship, and it got to 8. I mean, how long has it been? Five.
Yeah,
it's the 5th season.
5. Yeah. So
that was my question for when Greg spoke the day after Hobbs' resignation. I want to keep that in the back of your mind too. Like, this was the next day at football availability. Greg was obviously asked a lot of questions. Brian and I were, of course, two of the people asking him questions. It was so poignant to me that at Big Ten Media Days a month earlier, he said that this is the most vertically aligned Rutgers has ever been from an athletic standpoint. And then a month later, it's not falling apart. I want to put it smartly. It's not falling apart, but the person in charge of the athletics program resigns abruptly, and there are things not vertically aligned.
But wasn't that the press conference that he didn't mention Hobbs' name? Like he all but mentioned and I gotta tell you, Vito
that's a great point.
in field maintenance. I mean, he all but mentioned like everybody, and you can't without our equipment guys. I mean, it is, yeah. I mean, I think that was pretty telling, right?
Sure.
I mean,
It's interesting.
This is a man in Greg Schiano who thinks about everything he says, does. I don't know for a fact if it was an accident or not, but I'd be very, very surprised if that was not intentional.
Yeah, totally. I think so. And I will say this, like I think Greg wants a partner. Like if I had to guess what he wants, and if you look around right now, the ones that are doing successfully, essentially the athletic directors, what do you need? And like Ryan Day says, I need $20 million for a starting lineup, right? And there's a team of people going, all right, let's get Ryan Day $20 million so he can buy, the best running back in the SEC. Like, I mean, honestly, this is like, that's what's happening elsewhere. It's never going to happen here like that. But alignment is a great word. I think that's been lacking. I think that the one thing I would say right now with the Rutgers, like as for all the good things Pat Hobbs did, like there were some things he was doing that was holding this place back. Very simply, and out of caution, out of traditional, whatever you want to put, however you want to put it, out of the lawyer in him, out of not being, forward thinking enough. And believe me, we had conversations where we argued about this, and he disagreed strongly and said, he was doing things that trying to be proactive, and you just don't know all that we're doing. Okay, maybe I don't, but I do talk to a lot of people. And the sentiment from a lot of people around the athletic universe was that he was holding Rutgers back in some place. We'll see if they can find someone who can drag them forward. I guess that's.
Well, in the meantime, I'm interested to see what Ryan Passari's position in that realm is as the interim AD. He's not the AD yet, but he has the power of the AD, and kind of I don't anticipate. I think this is just me thinking here, but once the season has started already, I'm not sure how much influence the AD will have on the 2024 football season and the 2024-25 basketball season, right? I think that the work preparing for those years was years in the making. Now you can kind of let Ryan Passari have the year as the AD, just kind of keep the ship. I'm trying to find an analogy here that I can't think. Just make sure everything stays upright. And in the meantime, it'll be interesting to see if he'll be more aggressive in NIL, if that will be more part of his message, and just how he differentiates from what Pat Hobbs did. Because yes, you're right. He was his loyal lieutenant for many years, but now he's the guy in charge, and he has a bit of a power to do things differently if he feels fit.
Yeah. Talk about a bad spot. I mean, honestly, and I feel for him. And again, this is someone who survived anybody who's like a survivor of Julie Herman, kind of got through it. Really well respected chief of staff, knows everything that's going on in there. But man, you're thrown. You're from a lieutenant. The general's gone, and you've got zero time to prepare for it. Oh, and by the way, the season's here. I mean, it's tough. It's a tough job.
Right. But like Brian was saying, they've been preparing for this for years, right? And the guy that's been there he's been there 13 years. So he's got the experience. He knows the inner workings of the athletics department. And right, if anyone's best positioned to maintain, level the situation, it should be him. And of course, we haven't really we talked about his background a little bit, but obviously he was a college football player at University of Pennsylvania, understands football, understands the game at a high level, academic level, first and foremost, as an Ivy Leaguer, and a guy that's going to be hugely influential in how Rutgers comes out of this revenue sharing era, or goes into this revenue sharing era in the Big Ten coming soon.
Right. He certainly has an opportunity to make a stamp on it internally during the few months that he is running the show, so to speak. All right. Want to take some questions we got some questions from our texters. A lot of good ones, and a lot that we still can't answer. So keep that in mind. But this is an important one. Since Hobbs resigned, is he entitled to any severance under his contract? Boy, I wish we knew the answer to that. And the best way I can put it is we've asked. And in the past, when Tim Pernetti left, we knew exactly what money he was getting that day. I think other examples of that through the severance agreements were made public. Rutgers has not done that, has not acknowledged the existence of one. I don't know.
We've asked the university; they would not answer the question. We Oprah'd documents, and we've Oprah many things. And some of the Oprahs we got back were denied because they're personnel records, and we were told that personnel records almost entirely are exempt from Oprah. So I would assume this falls under the same category. If we get it,
they did not deny this one, though. Did they deny this one already?
They confirmed. Sorry, I should say they did not confirm or deny the existence of any documents pertaining to a potential investigation.
Right. But what about the severance agreement? Did they?
I have not received a response on that. My expectation is that I will receive the same response because it is a personnel-related matter.
Right.
But if we get a different answer, we'll let you guys know.
I have to imagine if there's money.
Do people know what Oprah is? Open.
Oh yeah, we've got.
Okay, all right. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure we need to bring a guest guy on to.
It's a public records request, folks.
Public records request.
Yeah, right.
Public information, which also its laws are changing in New Jersey. If you're reading the headlines,
yes,
which is also important.
It is a very good point. I don't know if that's going to make it harder. Of course, this can make it harder. I don't know if it makes it harder in this instance.
Of course,
Rutgers has made it hard as possible in every instance. But yeah, but again, this is something that we could not forget getting the document. Could not get a yes or no answer to the existence of a document. Telling you folks, reporting is not a fun job sometimes, and this is just Rutgers has decided not to play ball with the information here. The best way we can put it. And I'm gonna say that honestly because I think it's information we should have. If Pat Hobbs was given money on the way out the door, they should present that to us, and that's public. That's public information. We will fight. I know
at the State University of New Jersey.
Yes, it is. We will fight that to get that information. That's for sure.
So per his contract, we again they could have an agreement outside of this, correct? But the way his contract is worded, my understanding is, as not a lawyer, but reading the text of the contract, is that if he resigned, he could submit a document within 60 days of wanting to resign, and leadership, meaning the president, could decide whenever to honor that resignation, and the contract is over. No more money owed, nothing. That's my understanding. Obviously, there are always ways that two sides can agree and have a separation agreement, as you said. We are not sure exactly what happened, like you said, because Rutgers won't answer. But if it was strictly a resignation, both sides shake hands and go with their own ways, they would owe him nothing. I just find it hard to believe that to be the case, no matter the circumstances behind it, because that's a lot of money left on the contract, and it's hard to just let that go without getting any of it back. If
he walked away without a cent, again, citing health reasons to walk away without a penny, that doesn't add up. Like it already doesn't add up to me to walk away, to resign your job because you're having a serious health problem at a university that essentially gave $5 million to the women's basketball coach in a similar situation. Right. And I get, maybe people have said, well, maybe Pat Hobbs doesn't want to hold them over, the same way that Vivian Stringer did. I mean, it's a lot of money to leave on the table. Their sick leave, their leave of absences, separate again. Like people, this is just, it comes back to why this is all so unusual. And if he left, and that's very telling to me, if he ended up leaving this job without taking a penny from Rutgers University, that answers a lot of questions. But we do not have the answer to that yet. So stay tuned. All right, more questions. Who qualifies to be AD who is already in house? Joe wants to know. I think we talked about that a little bit. Ryan Passari, I think he will, depending on how he does, deserves an interview. Like he deserves an audience. He's been in there for, you would think that they would sit down and talk to him. I would say this, like I'd be surprised if it's an internal candidate. I don't think there was a secession plan within Rutgers. And even if there was, again, I come back to the idea of getting someone who has experience running an athletic department would be important, would be number one on my list of things to check by. And that would cross off Sarah Baumgartner and names like that as well. I don't know. We don't know if that's going to be the case for Rutgers, but you guys agree with that would be hard to imagine internal candidate.
I agree. And I'm also not crossing off someone from the professional ranks who understands contracts, player payments, sorry,
Yeah.
and bookkeeping and salary caps and things like that. I think that's valuable experience beyond, being the head person, at a law school or another college.
Are
So
you saying someone who like maybe a CEO of a major corporation that makes cell phones like Motorola, perhaps? Is that where you're going with this? Like a Greg Brown type figure that would go into the business world and tap their athletic director?
I'm thinking about it from a football and basketball perspective, where these are huge topics that are going to be extremely important. And
Yeah.
when you talk about, the business behind college athletics, I think that's the next logical step. So
Yeah.
would it cross over into the big private sector? It has already, right? At times in Rutgers history.
What do you think about that, Brian? If there was a candidate, this is a really interesting point, and one that I have kind of ruled out, maybe for the wrong reasons. I don't know. What do you think if they could find someone who is a successful a high level business person? Would you consider them for the job?
I think certainly you'd give it some thought. I do think that you need a second person, kind of to Pat's point, on the sports side of things, who knows college sports and the inner workings of the reality now, because this was difficult enough to deal with for ADs in the current job. Pat Hobbs was the AD for 4 or 5 years before this happened, and his head was probably spinning half the time with all these new things happening. So I would imagine a person that right now, if they're in the private sector, they're at best a very plugged in fan, but they're a fan nonetheless. They're not in the inner workings. So if you go that route, I think you have to hire a second person as a lieutenant who really, really knows what's going on, maybe as a potential successor. And I think maybe even consider adding a GM. I know some football programs have a GM to handle that stuff within the football program, or basketball programs have that too. I certainly think that they should look into that, regardless of who they hire, because I don't know that having an Altius partnership is enough to handle all of that, but that's kind of going a little bit off the rails here. But I certainly think it's possible. I still think if you're going to make a primary decision, if you have a choice between private sector or seasoned veteran in athletics, I think you got to pick the latter every time.
Yeah, as long as that seasoned veteran can tap into the, to the private sector. I mean, you want someone who's going to be able to get some, obviously raise some funds. And that's a good point. We should address, like, for me, number one thing, raising money would be the number one. Number two thing would be a vision for putting Rutgers in the conversation with the 25 schools and 40 schools, how many ever it is that survive this. And what else is on the list? What are the other things that are important for this job?
Like I thought just right now, what I was talking about and what Brian just said with a general manager, someone who understands payroll, like how these things are going to have to work. I think that's really important. That's all I got, though.
Crisis management. Yeah.
I would say someone who can
a public relations firm.
Yes. Someone who could avoid being in a scandal every other year. That would certainly be helpful, I think. I think people might feel that these things happen really often, and I think they happen more often than other places than they do at Rutgers, especially in the last 15 years or so. I think if you could find someone who could do their best to avoid finding themselves in these predicaments, that would be helpful for everybody.
Right. Okay. All right. Looking through some more questions, and we got this one from a few people. Why did Patrice Hobbs, Pat's wife, take down her Instagram with the Ireland pic if his health concern was legit and nothing to hide? In one of the many truly odd things that have happened during this story, Patrice Hobbs, Pat's wife, who was a presence at Rutgers games, sat courtside. I mean, was always around. Posted a photo was it 24 hours, 48 hours after Pat resigned?
48 hours. It was Sunday. He resigned Friday.
Right. Of the two of them in Ireland, smiling like a vacation pig. You put and people, I don't know, people kind of flipped out. It was texted to me, I don't know, 50 times. It felt like, probably not 50, but I would say over 10 times. People's like, what the hell is this? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Certainly free to do anything you want. Social media, you're a private citizen. It's your account. But it was not, to me, it was not a good look for someone who was leaving a job because of concern for their health. It just wasn't, and without talking to the media or really anybody on the way out the door.
I do want to address this because people are wondering if this is something that he resigned Friday, booked a flight Saturday, and went out Sunday. My understanding is this was a pre-planned vacation. Now I'm having a hard time nailing down exactly how it all worked out because peek behind the curtain, we were told 2 weeks before Pat Hobbs resigned that he was going to talk to the media about the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, which we had been looking forward to. That was pushed back because what we were told is he wasn't ready to address all the changes. They wanted more firm information, etc. Fair enough. I followed up asking, will he be available the following week? And I was told, no, he's going on vacation. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then that week comes and I learn he's in the office and his vacation is the following week. Obviously, that Friday he resigns and then he goes on the vacation the following week. Right. What I don't know is, was it always planned for this week? Was it pushed back a week because of events that led to his resignation? That I do not know. But my understanding is he always planned on going to Ireland this summer. And the only bad decision they made was posting about it publicly on Instagram and letting the world know and become the topic of Rutgers Twitter for 48 hours.
Yeah. It does go back to another interesting point about all this. The timeline, to me, is fascinating. And it's not like, he was having high level, he's planning for the season, planning for the future, planning to meet us to talk about it, meeting with influential people in the Rutgers community, a full staff meeting on Wednesday. Health concerns did not come up to. I have not talked to one human being who mentioned, "Oh, Pat said he was having cardiology." I mean, not one person. Friday he resigns again. Just that week. That's of that week. Tuesday night, big dinners. Wednesday, staff meeting. I guess Thursday was a bad day. I don't know how to put it. Yeah, but Friday, it's over. Yeah, and so
from everyone I've talked to, and Steve and Pat, maybe you guys have found someone else, but I could not find anybody that any earlier than 2 hours before, maybe 3 hours before the public announcement of his resignation, had any idea that the resignation was coming. I could not find one person. And we've talked to people that you would expect to know. Not one person was able to tell us, "Oh, we knew that, a day ago, 2 days ago, Pat had mentioned it in this meeting." I never heard anything until
Steve Peichel heard about it he was on vacation. I believe him. That's where he found out about it.
That's what he told Jerry Carino. Yes.
Yeah. So, and we didn't talk about that. It's funny no one asked about that. And I think that's a really important thing here. That was a close relationship. When all the stuff was going down with Schiano and Hobbs was under the microscope and we were putting the screws on him when that deal fell apart, Steve Peichel might have saved his AD's job. I don't know. That might be a stretch, but certainly stood up, went to bat for him in a very public way, built this contract around having Pat Hobbs as AD. You can't. If I get it that football drives the bus. People in basketball hate when you say that, but you still can't hire this next AD without his input, without his significant input.
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you given any sense of how are they? Is there any concern in basketball, or is this sort of the same thing that football is? All right, we're ready for the season. There's nothing we can do.
I would say it'd be a surprise if there wasn't concern because Pat Hobbs might have been the most basketball-friendly athletic director Rutgers has ever had. He was a basketball guy at heart. Steve Peichel was his crowning jewel as a athletic director, right? And he very clearly enjoyed being at the basketball games, firing up the crowd, bringing people. Phil Murphy sat next to him plenty of times courtside. That was his baby, right? I think he was much closer to the basketball program than he was to the football program, maybe for reasons related to the fiasco coaching search. But nonetheless, even I think when Ash was the head coach of football, he was closer to the basketball program. And I think you're not going to find another AD that will be leaning more towards basketball than football moving forward. I think that was kind of the pinnacle for the basketball program. And so because of that, I would be surprised if there wasn't a little bit of concern that they get a little bit less benefit of the doubt than they did under Hobbs.
Yeah. There's a lot of people who remember the days under Bob Mulcahy where it was forget the benefit of the doubt. It was like taking money from Paul to pay Peter, or whatever the expression is from basketball. I don't think we're going back to that. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, I think that you would certainly be concerned is the right word, but yeah, concerned is the right word if you're in basketball.
Nervous. Right now. A little nervous.
Nervous. A little nervous is the right word. Exactly. Whew, okay. We got through that one. Anything else we need to address, fellas? I think we addressed all the questions we can. I apologize. I know what everyone, that's about 12% of the questions, but did the best we can. What do you think? Can we miss anything, guys? Final thoughts? Brian, you could take like 10 minutes off and go for a walk. And this seems to have taken over your life here the last few weeks. You okay?
I'm doing all right. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of this, what the reaction is. Just interesting time for this to happen too. 2 weeks before the football season, he resigns. The story comes out 2 days before the season opener, which probably is not a great thing for football. They probably would have preferred this not to happen so close to the season, but it did. So, and I'm fascinated to see how an AD search impacts the most anticipated football and basketball seasons this school has had in half a century. Just a lot happening all at once.
Oh, a lot happening.
One last thing. There are obviously some fan changes for the football team. Getting into the stadium, you might want to look into that, Politi, from your past experience. But I also think there's one thing you were talking about earlier, and you said the next AD has to maintain that New York market and push that the way that Pernetti did to get Rutgers into the Big Ten. Do you remember the Yankees Rutgers partnership under Pat Hobbs?
Of course, yeah, that was
right. That was an important part of his legacy as well that we didn't touch on. Just popped up in the back of my mind.
Good point.
So,
the SHI partnership was a big thing. He did some corporate stuff that should go on the list. Yeah.
So you're saying that he was a big reason we were in Yankee Stadium last December.
Yeah.
In the Pinstripe Bowl. He was the reason I was there and not in Phoenix, Arizona.
I think Schiano might have something to do with that as well. But yeah. All right. Good job on that story, Brian. If no one else tells you, appreciate all of it. And I will say this, having gone through a few of these, the most complicated of these stories that we have ever tried to unravel, still unraveling it. But good job doing that done. And we'll be following it through, follow the coaching search, AD search, excuse me. And most of all, the next podcast we have, it'll be about a football game. We promise you that. We'll recap the Howard game soon. Thanks for listening to this. As always, fire away with your questions. If you have any story tips or anything else that you wanted to let us know, you know where to find us. Thanks for listening.